It is, for me, one of the most beautiful places I have ever been to in the world. And if you look at the history of this country, in terms of technology innovation, that is, I think it must be part of the culture. If you are a country with a unique language that nobody else in the world can speak, if you're going to create something, you're going to have to think globally. Finland wants to take Finland to the world. That actually requires the world to come to Finland. But making it harder to come to Finland, making it less attractive to come to Finland, I think that will blow up in Finland's face in many years. Do you want a person who speaks Finnish, or do you want a person who loves Finland? I would actually speak more to the people who come to Finland and expect Finland to change for them and say, that's actually not a good attitude.
Hello, welcome to Joy of Finland, the podcast that highlights strengths and areas of improvement of Finland. I'm your host, Matt. A little bit about myself. I'm originally from India, and I grew up pretty globally, mostly in North America. And I was an exchange student that came back for a master's here in Finland, and I've had an amazing time here. And that's why I wanted to share more about what's so great here. But at the same time, I want to paint an authentic picture and bring awareness to what's not so great as well. And I'd like to introduce my first guest. I'll call you Dups for short.
Please do.
He's the Chief Technology Officer of Supermetrics. And Supermetrics is one of Finland's prominent startup success stories. And it's a data management and analysis tool for marketers. But why don't we just get started, Dups, by you telling us a little bit more about yourself and how you ended up in Finland.
Great. Pleasure to meet you, Matt, and to everyone who's listening. So my name is, as you said, a very long name. Yeah. It's Duleepa Wijayawardhana, which nobody but my mother calls me. Everyone calls me Dups. And how did I end up in Finland? That's a long story. But like you, I was born in Sri Lanka, but I never actually lived there, or very few years anyway. And I grew up in Papua New Guinea and Hong Kong, and then ended up in Canada. And like you, I'm a Canadian citizen, and I spent most of my life in Canada. All around Canada, actually. My hometown is St. John's, Newfoundland, but I lived in Edmonton, in Montreal, in Kingston, in Kelowna, BC. So yeah, all over Canada. And how I ended up in Finland is that I used to work for a company called MySQL, which is a database company. And when I was finishing my own startup and I had sold that and I was living in Kingston at this point in time, I was thinking I was going to move. I had decided to move, and I called up quite many of my friends, and especially in the investment world. And one of them was Open Ocean here in Finland, who are excellent investors in Finland. And I asked Patrick, one of the partners there, is there any really interesting startups that I should be looking at? And he sent me Supermetrics, and he said, maybe you should have a look at this one. And I looked at Supermetrics, and at this point, Supermetrics, this was 2017, or 16 actually, at this point that they sent this to me. I looked at it and I went, oh my goodness, I could have saved so much of my time and my life had I known about this product. How do I not know about this product? So Patrick said, why don't you come over and you can help us do the technology due diligence, because they'd met at Slush 2016. They'd met Mikael at Slush 2016 and had wanted to invest. So I came out to Finland. At this point in time, it was mostly, hey, you're paying for a trip to Finland and I've got friends here. I come here every year or two to visit friends. So why not? It's nice to see them, and I'll get to see Supermetrics. And they were in the small office up in Aleksanterin Katu and at the top, and it was like 7 people at this point. And I met Mikael, and I really enjoyed the conversation with Mikael and the team. And I was blown away by how global this company had become. I don't think anyone in Finland knew about this company. All their customers were global, and he had built this thing as a one-man shop. It was a pretty amazing story. And I thought, pretty neat. I like Finland. If I'm going to move anywhere, it was between San Francisco and Finland. I know, San Francisco and Helsinki, which you're going to choose. But I actually really like the company. And I said to him, if you want my help, I'm willing to come. It took him months to actually decide. And at this point, I was almost going to San Francisco when he phoned. And I said, yeah, sure. And then a month later, I was here in Finland, 2 cats in my bags, and yeah, what turned out to be, maybe I'll stay for 6 months, maybe I'll stay for a year. It's been 6.5 years actually this week. So, yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah, that's a very long story. As Newfoundlanders tend to love have the gift of the gab, so I can just keep on talking. So you better ask me some other stuff.
Yeah, but I guess you already touched on it a bit, which is that you already liked Finland, and that's what this podcast is all about. Why don't we get right into it? What is it that you like about Finland, or what do you perceive as Finland's strengths?
Oh my goodness. There are so many strengths to this small little country. You and I are from Canada. Canada is very similar to Finland, in my opinion. I think there's the love of it outdoors, the beauty of the wild open spaces, the winter. I do have to say Finland is mostly warmer than most places I've lived in Canada, but that's a good thing. For me, coming here definitely wasn't a change in terms of climate or the temperature or anything like that. And certainly the beautiful vistas that you have here. One of the reasons I used to come here so often is because my friends who I used to work with are from a place called Nagu in the archipelago, and it is for me one of the most beautiful places I have ever been to in the world. These small little islands everywhere. So the positives of Finland, certainly the outdoors, the great environment, the just so many different things that come about when you live in a space and you can feel the clean air and the water and everything else. I think that in itself makes you a better person. And that's, what we thrive as humans. So that's one thing for sure. The other thing is the innovation aspect of it. I said so I come from a video games background and then worked for this company called MySQL. MySQL became, at the time, the reason I think we have the internet today is because of MySQL. You would not have Facebook, you would not have Google, you would not have LinkedIn, you would not have many of the products that you use today. And MySQL came from Finland. And it came from a bunch of people who went to the Åbo Academy in Turku, who got together, who created a worldwide, and at the time, in 2001, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and when I joined in was 2007, a fully remote operation that was 450 people who had created an open source database that was powering the entire world. That's pretty amazing. And I don't think it could have come from any other place than Finland. There are and some of the people I've met through that, some of the Nokia people, how they started Nokia. I talked to the first person who sent an MMS within the walls of Nokia to actually from one phone to another. These are amazing innovations. And if you look at the history of this country in terms of technology innovation, I think it might be part of the culture, it might be part of the language, it might be part of the way that and I find this in remote parts of Canada as well. Like when you are faced with being so remote and in some ways isolated, some ways different and unique, you have to come up with ways to live in this world and to thrive in the environments that there are. And maybe that's it. I don't know. I can't tell you. I am not a Finn. I cannot tell you what it is that drives that. But that's number 2. And I think number 3 is just... and part of number 2 is I think if you are a country with a unique language that nobody else in the world can speak, if you're going to create something, you're going to have to think globally. If you're going to just serve the Finnish market, you're 5 million. That's it. It's not going to be very big. Kudos to everyone who does that. That's fantastic. But if you're going to have to get out, you got to grow out of that. And then that means that you have to have people who are already thinking globally. And I think if you're in a country like Finland with a very unique language like Finnish and a minority language in Swedish, and you've learned those 2 languages as a kid, I think it's easy to learn what I think of as a crazy language, which is English, but is spoken by many of the world. But also, you can find people here who speak everything from Mandarin, Arabic, and these are absolute born-up, raised Finns whose first language is Finnish, and they speak 3, 5, 6 languages. And that, to me, is amazing. And to be able to function in all those languages, you have to start thinking about the culture of those languages. And I think that allows you to think globally and think bigger than a small place like Finland. Those are 3 things. You asked me for 3.
Yeah,
I can go on a few more.
But so it sounds like the nature here is one thing that you definitely valued a lot. And then what the culture and environment that allows for innovation in Finland. And was it the third thing was about language, or maybe you could clarify a bit more about.
It is the global outlook that
Yeah.
comes from having to learn so many languages, I think, is what
Yeah.
it is. Yeah.
And I think before we go into areas of improvement, I do think we have time for a couple of other points if you want to talk about what you like about Finland as well.
The thing about the history of Finland, that if you think about a country that 100 years ago, brother was fighting brother, this was a country fairly poor, racked by malaria, if you didn't know that, which is weird. But this place used to apparently malaria used to be endemic here, which is something like you and I are familiar with, and it is not really that much fun. I've had malaria and it's not that much fun. And to think that 100 years later, some of the highest infant mortality in the world, to go from that to within 100 years to have patched up those differences between different sides of society, to have created such an inclusive society that is very equalized as much as possible. I think there's so much more, and this is the improvements part that we can get into. But to come out of that, to have come up with innovative solutions to fix the infant mortality, the baby boxes, the education system, all of these things, and to go through all of that, go through one of the hardest recessions, I think, that happened in Europe, I think happened here in the 90s, to creating Nokia, to all the other things that have happened since then, and to have such a safe place that you can just walk around now. I think that's an amazing thing. I think there's a lot of good things that Finns should be proud of, should be happy about. They are supposedly the happiest country in the world. I think more content than happy, but either way, yeah, I think these are some of the things that I would say.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I appreciate the history lesson. I myself didn't even know a lot about what Finland was like 100 years ago, so I need to do some digging there. But yeah, I think you already touched on areas of improvement, and I think that's something we can get into. What do you think needs to change in Finland?
You know what? I haven't yet been to a country that didn't need some sort of improvement. I am a very proud Canadian, and I could probably spend 8 hours talking nonstop about the things that I think Canada should be improved. Now, I have to be careful when I talk about Finland because, for one, I'm a technology leader here, and I have to be cognizant of that fact, and I'm going to be honest about it. I'm very transparent. I'm a very direct person in that sense. And then the other thing that I would say is that I'm not a Finnish citizen. For me, Finland is a country where I live and work, and I do love. I'm a permanent resident here, and I do enjoy Finland a lot, but I'm not a citizen. I do not have the right to vote. So I have to put all those caveats in mind when I say anything that I say, and I think any listener should understand that too. And when you don't have the right to make those kind of changes or to be a voice in those kind of things, it is easy for anyone to come in and say, you should do this, you should do that. But actually, it's very difficult. And there are nuances about societies and cultures that need to be taken into account. So I think while I do believe that most Finns are incredibly global and have a global outlook and are building companies and technologies and innovating that is globally, but at the same time, Finland is a small country and it's punching above its weight class in the world. But I think the reality is that it needs more people from the outside world. If you want to have global businesses, the expression I like to use is that Finland wants to take Finland to the world. That actually requires the world to come to Finland. And that's never going to be that easy. And ultimately, if anything, I've seen this now over 30 years in Canada, is that immigration policies and work rights and family immigration and things like that is a really difficult thing. Absolutely one of the most difficult things. And I can say that no country in the world has ever gotten it right. And this is one of the things that Finland has to keep working on. You have to encourage people to be here, to want to be here, to discover the beauty that is Finland, and at the same time help businesses from here reach those parts of the world and speak to them in both the language of Finland, and I don't necessarily mean Finnish, the language, but the language that is the culture of Finland to the culture of wherever that may be. And when you can bridge that gap, you find the greatest successes in terms of making companies successful. So I think that's one of probably, for me, almost always foremost improvement, because when I look at Supermetrics, which is now 200 people here in Finland, we're headquartered here in Finland. We will not move from Finland. And I personally am adamant about that. And I know the rest of the leadership team, even though the leadership team is disparate from UK, from Ireland, and from here, we are embedded in Finland. The office culture that we have, we actually export to our other offices. For example, we have a shoeless office. Guess what? All the offices around the world that are Supermetrics are shoeless offices. We actually send Moomin stuff to each of the offices. We have Finnish furniture. We have Finnish decor, all of these things. But we also have a Finnish culture and identity. So that is our transparency, the way we work, the way we talk, the way we want people to behave, our values. These are all, I think, not just Finnish, but certainly the way we look at it is Finnish. And I think this needs to continue. And I think that actually creates that. So for me, that conversation always needs to happen. So those 200 people, 100 people at least, are not born Finns. We have 40 nationalities, 45. That's amazing. That's incredible. In Finland, not our global company. That's here in Finland. We have a global company. That's amazing. And that is the kind of company that I would love to see. But I always say that sometimes, do you want a person who speaks Finnish or do you want a person who loves Finland? They're two different things sometimes. I see that in Canada. Not everyone speaks French or English, but there are people I've met who try and who embody the spirit of what it is to be Canadian. And I would love that person to be Canadian far more than the person who knows English and French, who is absolutely an asshole. Oops, am I allowed to say things?
Yeah, you're allowed
All
to
right,
say
good
whatever
enough.
you want. Yeah.
So that's, I think, one of the areas for improvement.
It makes sense. And I think it separates between just the actual systems in place for immigration or then the cultural attitudes. And I guess, well, in Supermetrics, that would be great. Like you mentioned, if more companies could emulate and replicate that. I would say I see that in the startup ecosystem for sure. And I'm in that bubble. So I'm entrenched in very international circles. But then I don't know how applicable that is outside of the startup and tech world. Maybe one thing I could ask about is with regards to comparing Canada and Finland. Mm-hmm. I think you mentioned, I always like to think Canada and the U.S. have had a long time to work on immigration versus Finland is relatively new in terms of bringing large amounts of people here. So do you think there's anything to be learned from Finland or for Finland from Canada, or what's better or worse there?
Oh, I think every culture and every society needs to actually look at themselves. I think it's a hard thing to say this works in Canada, so therefore you should try it here. But I can say that every system should look at other systems to see where the failures were and why, and learn from those failures. Successes are actually harder to learn from, oddly enough, but failures are quite easy to learn from. Case in point, by the way, so did you know, and I did not know this until last week, that the medical record system used here in, I have to be careful because I can't really say companies' names, but the systems that are used here in Finland is exactly the same system as used in Canada. It's also used in Denmark, in the UK, and in certain parts of the US as well. And do you know how badly it is hated by doctors?
I've heard, I don't know what the system name is, but yeah. I've heard from doctors that it's horrible, which doesn't make sense.
And funnily enough, apparently, like we put it in Canada, one of the first, and apparently nobody learned from it. So when you look at these failures, like when you look at failures or things that don't go right, I think those are important things. I'll tell you one of the really good things that I discovered about Finland or moving to Finland, which is different from Canada, because I've moved people to Canada as well as part of the different companies that I've been part of. And I can say that getting set up in Canada is actually really difficult. If you have a work visa and things things like that. It can take a year, 2 years to get even, which is crazy when you're trying to get a technology person in, though I think it's a lot shorter these days. But then the other part is when you get to Canada, the banking systems are archaic and phone systems are archaic, and you need to go around with utility bills. Who the hell has utility bills anymore? You need to show up in person half the time and go, yes, this is my electricity bill in my name, sir. Please give me whatever it is that you're offering. Here, it's a lot easier. And I have to say that the systems in Finland do work really well for that kind of stuff. I was quite shocked at how quickly I was able to get up and running in a new country. So there's good things there. I think one of the things that I would look at is I understand the need for you to get people like me to come to Finland. And I get that. I have to say that people like me who have spent already 20, 30 years in the industry may not necessarily settle down in Finland. What you're actually looking for half the time is the next generation of leaders, of thinkers, of innovators. And they usually come from the student world. So one of the things that I have noticed over time is if you can invite the brightest minds to universities, and I think Canada was very good at this in the early days, and get them into the system, even if it meant that they don't pay as much tuition or things like that. So it isn't getting the smart, rich people from other countries, but more the smart people from other countries to come and work here and be a student, and then foster and make those people part of the system, because they learn the languages, they learn the culture, they create social groups very much faster than we when we get to our age, or me when I get to my age, I should say. You, definitely not that case. I think you actually have success for your country. I've seen that in different provinces in Canada, because I think a lot of Finns probably don't realize it. You see Canada, but actually you see it's 10 countries plus 3 territories, and they have absolutely all different rules everywhere, and they're all absolutely insane. In Canada, you can definitely see that different immigration policies, different student work visas, different ways of getting people to be part of society has worked differently. In Finland, you have it literally is one province in Canada, and you don't have the ability to migrate workers from Newfoundland to Calgary to Ontario. I mean, the flow of capital and flow of resources doesn't happen here. The only way is for people to move out of Finland to another part of Europe. So I think there are many lessons to be learned. But making it harder to come to Finland, making it less attractive to come to Finland, I think that will blow up in Finland's face in many years. It may not look like that now, and that's perfectly fine. Everything, when you have a short-term view, because that's what politics is, very short-term, you don't realize the things you're putting in place for 10, 15 years down the road, right? A student who starts today in university at Finland goes through 3 years, and then they're trying to find their way. That takes 2 to 3 years. If they don't feel encouraged to stay, if they don't feel that they've got a path to success, they're going to leave. But if they do stay, that 3 years, a crop of them are going to create the next businesses, work with people from around the world and here. They're going to create amazing stories, and they're going to be things that in 10 years are going to be amazing.
Yeah, it sounds like a investment for the future.
Exactly.
Is what's needed. On the student side, I can say I'm a student that has had a very smooth and seamless time here because I was quickly able to get a job at a startup, and I switched my visa from a student visa to work visa, and then after that, it's like all headaches are behind you. All pain points that are there are gone. So do you think there's anything that needs to what needs to change for students now as it is in Finland, do you think?
I don't actually know. I'm sorry to tell you that I don't actually know. But I do think, I actually don't know. I think your experiences probably speaks more to it. I can only speak from it from 20, 30 years ago, right, when I was a student. So it's a long time ago. And I think my experience in Canada in the, way back then was very different from the experience that I think you might be having here. But maybe similar. I don't know.
Yeah. What I see is a lot of students look elsewhere, unfortunately, after they graduate because they're
Why
not.
is that?
I think it's because they're not able to secure employment in their field. If you're looking at a lot of industries, Finnish is required, and I think it's really hard within the time frame of when you're a student balancing your studies to get to a level of Finnish proficiency where you could actually work in it. And there seems to be the challenge of Finnish language requirements where it's not a easy black and white answer because, of course, I do get on the one side, if it makes sense for business or the work that you do, that you would need Finnish. And then the other side, it's easy to do things a certain way if it's been done a long time like that. So bringing in the first international person into a fully Finnish company can be really challenging. But then the Finnish language requirements is, I would say, how global do you want to be as a company versus do you want to preserve the language and culture of Finland, which is also important. So it's not a easy question to answer.
No, and I think this is, for example, a question that's happening even today in Quebec. Yeah. This morning I was reading that the Quebec government has said that the English language universities, so McGill and Concordia, will have to actually increase tuition for people coming from outside of the province. If people didn't know, literally, these provinces in Canada are different countries. You literally are migrating from one province, one country to another when you go from these places, from one province to another. And the other requirement is that a student at the university must show a minimum French proficiency and also show it at the end. Very similar to many countries which are preserving their culture through language. And I think I actually agree with trying to preserve culture through language. I think language is a way we think, the way we communicate. A structure of a language can actually change, I think, my personal view, the way that we think about things. Words that we normally use might actually change our behaviors. So I think language is very important. Maybe there's more help that's required for students than here, that once you've graduated. But there's also a proficiency towards, for example, even if I ever, and I will one day, by the way, this is one of my goals, is to be able to learn to speak Finnish with enough fluency that I can have a conversation. I don't know whether I will ever be able to work in Finnish to a degree where I can get that. But then the same can be said of a Finnish person who we say, you need to work in English. That's actually a very difficult thing to do, right? So it's coming at it together in some sort of fashion that makes sense. And that's difficult. It's not one or the other, right? I am never going to go and say to anyone here, no, you've got to change your language from Finnish to English. I think it's a non-starter. Yeah. But, as you say, if you are the first international person in a Finnish company, you have to meet in the middle somehow. You have to figure that out.
Yeah, and I think it's maybe hard to look at it on an individual company level, but then if you're looking at Finland, broadly speaking, then what you touched about is Finland needs to bring in the international people first, and so it's more on a macro level, and how do you navigate that? It's not an easy question. I don't have the answer, and I don't think anyone really does, but I think we're nearing about time here, but anything else, last points that you would want to say about areas of improvement for Finland?
Areas of improvement for Finland. Every country has its little problems here and there, but I think if people want to have an inclusive, diverse, and amazing society that grows into the future, that is always thinking about the beauty of the world and the climate and everything else, that all the challenges we have today, whether that be our neighbor to the east or any of the other problems in this wide world. I really hope that people get an understanding through talking to people from all over the world. I think when you're a very international person, you've grown up all over the place. I'm a very international person. You grow up all over the place. And one of the things that happens when you do that, you're probably a third culture kid. I'm a third culture kid. This is what we are. We can speak the languages of many different people, not through the language of the words that come out of our mouth, but the language of the culture that we speak to. There's so many things that people have in common, and we tend to focus so much on the differences. And I think there's something that says the more you know someone, the more you focus on their differences than the things that make you similar. And I think humans in general are mostly similar, 95%. In fact, I believe you and I share probably 99.8-9% of genes. And yet we focus on the crazy, small, little details that make us different. And I think anyone coming to Finland, I would actually speak more to the people who come to Finland and expect Finland to change for them and say, that's actually not a good attitude. I would ask you to change, to accept and look at the history, go out and explore this country and actually try to understand Finland. Just as much as Finns should understand the world, I think the people coming here should also take the time, actually spend the time to understand why this place is so amazing. Just like I would say for anyone coming to Canada or to wherever in the world they are.
Yeah, I think it's always about meeting in the middle, so to speak. And that's basically everything I had to cover in my podcast. So I don't know if you have any last thoughts you want to leave with the audience.
I got nothing, but you can catch me anywhere. You can catch me on LinkedIn. Please do understand, I get a lot of people trying to sell me stuff on LinkedIn. It's like the crazy place to message me. I think you might have messaged me there. I think it took me like 3 weeks to even read it because I have to go through all the salespeople. And this is to the salespeople. Please stop sending me as much sales stuff. Anyway, I know that's going to fall on deaf ears. But anyway, so you can reach me there. I have a very long name. I'm easy to find. I have my own website. You can find me through that. And I'm no longer on Twitter or X very much. I still have my account there, but you can reach me through that. And of course at Supermetrics. And anyone in Finland is welcome to reach out to me and talk to me.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Dups.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me on.